Hello and welcome to Highkey Obsessed. I am your host, Thomas Boomhauer, and joining me today, she's fresh off her first ever Macklemore in the Parking Lot spoken word rendition of Thrift Shop. It's the one and only Cassie!
Hello, hello. That's a good one.
Today, I feel like the energy today, it's a little unhinged in a good way, in a great way. And I have it down further in the notes, but it feels like a pilot episode to me, or a backdoor pilot. Because it's like the format's a little bit different than what we've been doing. We're going to talk about something at the tail end that I'll get into a second, but technical difficulties, we've got a new recording platform we're trying out, lots going on. And we've got a grab bag of topics for our illustrious audience, arranged around the kind of central idea of things that seem like witch trials but aren't. Witch trials by other names was kind of the elevator pitch for it. But as I got into the research, and as we'll talk about, even though they're adjacent to witch trials and often clumped together, I didn't think that they ended up being very similar at all in a lot of cases. And so it's more kind of like paranormal panics and witch trials by other names.
Yeah.
More so than actual witch trials. And the other thing is that, like, it's been a dark season. It's been heavy. We originally had a pretty difficult episode planned for this, but we decided that we didn't have the time to devote to covering it in an appropriate way. And it was time to cover something at least fun adjacent, because we got like a New England vampire panic that happened in the fucking 1800s, right? We have werewolf panics. We have people being like, the War of the Worlds teleplay was real, or not teleplay, radio play was real. Like, people are freaking out.
And people who are uncontrollably dancing, and that's a bad thing, apparently.
Yes. That one is probably like the most horrifying of them.
It's so unhinged.
Just like 400 people dancing uncontrollably.
Also, it's funny. I'm really interested to hear about the werewolf stuff, because I did very, dear listeners, I have to admit, I'm going through it right now. I did very minimal research for this episode. This is a Thomas heavy episode. But the very little bit I read about werewolves was from like way earlier, like hard medieval period.
Ooh.
And so it's kind of interesting. You say they're all very different, or not different, but like there's not a ton of similarities to the witch trials, but, and this could be like confirmation bias on my part, but there was this like kind of continual thread through of like anti-women sentiment, even when the victims of, I don't know why I just used quotation marks, but the victims of the whatever panic it was, even when those were mostly men, there was still like this inherent anti-women sentiment surrounding the larger situation, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, the werewolf one was the most similar to the witch trial one, because it had Christianity, it had the pagan beliefs being misconstrued and folk beliefs being misconstrued as devilry, and like a lot of the control, the isolated areas, the old people being targeted, things like that.
Yeah, that is the angle the native or folk stories and beliefs element is where I was going to do my research if I had actually done my research.
We got a lot going on, listeners. We told you in our first ever episode that this isn't our full-time gig. This isn't even our part-time gig. We got lots of stuff going on. And so we try to devote as much care and time as we can to it. But sometimes, price of the brick, and in this case, the brick is time, it's going up. We also, to get into the backdoor pilot of it all, we have a kind of literary wrap-up discussion on the back end of this podcast. We'll figure out where. We're going to be talking about The Will of the Many, which, Cassie, you finally read. And you have some thoughts on, I have some thoughts on your thoughts, and we're going to get into it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So, before we do, can you please tell our fine feathered friends where to follow the show on social medias, where they can follow you on social media, and, where they can follow the podcast, and once they do follow it, what kind of reviews do we want?
Absolutely, I can. You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Highkey Obsessed Podcast. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok at Sharkbait's Bookshelf. And please find us wherever you listen to podcasts and follow the show. And please give us those 5-star ratings and reviews. If you don't give us 5 stars, we will dip your shoes in holy oil to cure you
Oh,
from your uncontrollable dancing. And that sounds gross.
shout out. That does sound
That
gross.
sounds really slippery and kind of
You
gooey
ever
between
been
the
like
toes.
cooking something, like deep frying something and a little oil drips? It takes forever to clean up.
Well, I was thinking like you wouldn't necessarily know this, but like jellies for my millennial girlies out there who grew up wearing jelly shoes, the like
Oh,
how like gross and slippy slidey they would get during summertime when your feet were all sweaty, but they're like, but really, I don't know why you loved them so much. They were disgusting. They were awesome, but they were disgusting. That's
context
kind of
free
what I'm
spoiler,
thinking
jelly
of.
shoes.
Yes,
This is a
definitely.
this episode is ripe with them. Okay. So now let's get into it. I think it is important to note when we start in America, we're taught about witch trials, which is really just Europe executed a bunch of witches and Salem happened.
Yeah, if that. I mean, literally, I think I was only taught about Salem, to be
Hmm.
honest. Yeah.
And Salem, it's very much kind of like those Puritans were fucking crazy. They were superstitious. And mass hysteria. The girls were freaking out and staring themselves into believing it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of what gave me the idea, in addition to the witch trials by other names idea, is
Mm-hmm.
that I think that talking about other mass hysteria events and incidents in the ways that they differed or are similar to witch trials could be pretty interesting. And so, like, as we get into it, I think naturally you'll call out some of the bullshit and some of the differences. And, but what I think the witch hunts that we've talked about thus far, for the most part, there might be elements of hysterias and whatnot going on. But really, to me, they're more moral panics and outrages, and than they are a symptom of mass hysteria. Because, like,
Mm.
often the things that are called mass hysterical outbreaks at this point, or like psychogenic illness is the appropriate term, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
It's things like the dancing plague. It's these weird, where it's things where like someone's on a plane and they're sick, and then next thing you know, everyone on the plane is exhibiting those symptoms because someone says, "Oh my God, it could be this." It's things like that, like
Mm-hmm.
quick trigger events or like snapshots. It's not hundreds of years of persecution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, like Salem, because there were those convulsions, that there are elements of it, but again, there's like it's different to me.
Yeah, for sure.
I also think that, like, in the case of the witch trials, more often than not, you can figure out there's like they're fueled by like definitive, determinable things. There's religious turmoil, fear, or the other, and with the cytogenic illness or mass hysteria outbreaks, that's not always the case. Like the dancing plague, woman just started dancing, no one could figure out why. Other people were caught up in it for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
There were underlying tensions and things like that, but there wasn't like someone came into the community and started rooting out witches.
Right.
And
Right.
then that,
I,
like, because there's someone comes into the community, they say there's a bunch of witches here, they root out one or two, and then it spirals. There's an inciting
mm-hmm.
event, an inciting factor, and then, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
there's just a difference.
No, I definitely agree. And yeah, there were absolutely plenty of cases where it didn't take an outside force coming in and to start
Mm,
the witch panic. Um, but there was a significantly less controlled element to it, I feel like. The way they talk about I'm the most reading about and research about the dancing panic. That
mm.
was called dancing plague.
The dancing plague.
Um, and that one, like the way they responded to that is so incredibly different.
Yeah.
So incredibly different from the way they responded to witch accusations and witch
Hmm.
trials. It is wild to me because it's the same time frame.
Yeah, it's a little bit before they really started getting
Right.
insane, but yeah,
But
it's
after the first one,
yeah, it's
it's
after the Malleus
after.
Maleficarum.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like,
So it's Malice Maleficarum 1485, Scottish witch trials, yeah, 1560 to 1730. So this is not that much earlier than the Scottish
Yeah.
witch trials, which, if you recall, the Scottish witch trials came after mainland Europe's witch trials had already begun.
Hmm.
So, like, not like ton later, but like they were later. So it is interesting that like 50 years-ish or so. Anyway, and we'll get into it.
Yeah. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the werewolf panics and werewolf trials, which I intended to do a lot more research on. I did do about an hour of research into this, but it became clear that this was like a much larger can of worms than I anticipated. However, one thing I want to note is that crazy motherfucker Pierre de Lantour, if you recall from the Basque Witch Hunts episode that we discussed with Dr. Jan Mathielsen, apparently he wrote in whatever his demonological text was that 30,000 werewolves were executed in France alone from 1520 to 1630, which is just not true, just not correct at all.
I
And
mean,
he was
that's
also,
an insane number of people to claim to have died in that amount
because
of
they
time.
were werewolves. And then
Right.
one of the things said that it was just that was the population of the territory that he was obsessed with, not the Basque country, but the Laborde. I'm pronouncing that very badly, but
That is where, so like there was in the 1300, like a lot of werewolfy stuff in that part of France.
yeah,
Like,
is that
and there's,
where
like,
the Beast of the Gévaudan? No, that was like
Yeah.
Louis, I think. So right, it's one of the Louis Beast, the Gévaudan.
well, I don't know where all my windows were.
Yeah, that's the 1700s.
Yeah, no. So this is before,
France
this
is
is
so
like way
crazy,
early.
man.
I love France. France is so great.
But
They
yeah,
just
so it's
fuck
like,
all this random shit.
yeah, werewolf and wolf monster related panics were just something that occurred throughout time and place and continue to this day, pretty much in Europe and America at least. And so one of the more famous ones that we're not going to talk about, and we just touched on, is the Beast of the Gévaudan, which is going to be its own episode at the very least someday, maybe a summer series about animal attacks or something like that. But my understanding of this is that the werewolf panics seem to have been similar in witch hunts sometimes in all but names. However, often men were the primary victims and targets of these. And this can be disputed because, again, I only did about an hour of research into this. It seems different again to me because, yeah, people were definitely terrified of witches. They were like, really thought they were witches. They really thought they were werewolves. It's hyper remote areas. And the most famous cases, it seems like either it's crazy dudes confessing to being werewolves and just being believed or not believed later on, or it was in fact serial killers who then said that they were werewolves. Like the people were killing people and then being caught up, like being accused of being werewolves because they were slaughtering their victims. And I'm like,
That's smart.
that's like you were a murderer. Or
Oh,
sometimes
that's
there were just wolves
interesting.
eating people. And
Right, just like
so,
normal wolves.
someone would be like, actually, I think it was that fucker, David. And it's like, David's like, what the fuck? Just because I live
slept
near
with
the
my
woods,
wife. He's also a werewolf.
he's a werewolf that killed and ate this person. It's like, God damn. He's eating my sheep. I saw him in the fields.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah. Well, and
It
also like
also
a kid,
seems like-
remember like during the Basque Witch trials, there was like the little boy who
Mhm.
said he was
He
a
said he
werewolf.
was a wolf. Yeah.
Or he was a wolf. He could turn into a wolf.
I'm a wolf.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a real boy.
It also seems like the Baltic regions, as at least later on and during the same period as the witch trials that we've been covering, so the early modern Europe, the like Renaissance period, they were still less Christianized than Western Europe, especially in Livonia, which is now modern day Latvia and Estonia. But they would have combined werewolf witch trials often, and they had this folk belief that werewolves, that they were quite similar to like pagan folklore, pagan folk or shamanic beliefs, that they were folk heroes and healers. Like they were protecting their communities often. And there were bad werewolves, but there are also good werewolves. And then the Christians see that and they're like, that's actually demonic heresy. I don't know what you're talking about. Transforming into a wolf is evil. which is
Mm-hmm.
similar to like people who would confess that they engaged in magic to heal somebody and then would be convicted and executed as a witch.
Right. Hmm.
And the victims of these tended to be like older peasants, Jesus Christ, I don't know why I can't say it, folk healers,
Folk healers.
and socially marginalized figures, people who were already like under suspicion. So again, that is a
So that's
commonality with
pretty,
witch hunts.
yeah, that's quite
It
similar.
just seems more gender neutral or gender agnostic, I guess, than the witch trials.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
And a defining characteristic of those accused of being werewolves in Livonia is that they claimed participation in spiritual journeys, where they said they left their bodies to battle malevolent forces in the service of good.
Ooh, oh, that's cool.
Another interesting wrinkle to this is that, like, as Europe grew more industrialized and just fucking killed all the wolves,
Mm.
wouldn't you know it, werewolf fears started going down.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I really think the fear of wolves is so crazy and interesting. And it's really just from like an anthropology point of view, so interesting because there's areas that were heavily settled by German populations in the United States. And they still, like, those are the areas that still are really, really terrified of wolves and really heavily eradicated wolves during that period, their
Mm-hmm.
colonialism era.
Their colonialism era.
Yeah.
That is not an era that we want in the tour. Thank you.
No, we don't like it, Taylor.
Uh, See, told you
But
this would
yeah,
all go
I
back to
fucked with wolves,
colonialism
as you
somehow.
know.
I do know you love wolves.
I love wolves. They're really cool. And the other thing I want to shout out here is that even though my belief, as I think we've touched on here, but I wrote about my belief and my interest in the paranormal definitely dwindling to all time lows. But I still do listen to them from time to time because
Hmm.
I still love the stories. They're interesting, and the fact that people are often credibly giving these reports or like believe that they saw these things is interesting. And there
Hmm.
are at least two examples of modern day werewolf type freakouts, and one of those is the Michigan Dogman, which is still seen to this day. The people still report seeing Dogman sightings, which are upright walking wolves or like basically movie werewolves.
Right.
And the other one is the Beast of Bray Road, which is definitely a werewolf. And they're not like mass panics or hysteria necessarily, but people were reporting sightings of these and freaking the fuck out about a werewolf being in their communities in the 1900s.
Hmm.
Incredible stuff. And like I'm talking about like the 1980s, 1900s.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah.
was about to make an argument that like the 1900s, like from start to finish, is like massively different. But wow,
Hmm.
that's yikes.
Yeah. Next
That's
up
pretty
on our
funny.
tour of Mania is the Dancing Plague of 1518. And I feel like this is something that is pretty, like, people know about this, right? I feel like people know that at least dancing plagues happened. They might
I
not know,
feel
like,
like I feel like I must have, but like
okay.
it I was like, what was it? It was making me like I think what I knew about was like the jumping sickness, not the dancing plague.
Okay. There's a
I
lot
don't
of
know that I
these.
ever heard of this.
There's a fair amount of these.
Yeah.
It's been very hot on the East Coast lately, I think, but most of the country. So I have a little bit to get into as we talk about the dancing plague.
Oh dear.
1518, summer in Strasbourg, and things are about to get a whole lot hotter. One woman, Frau Trophea, steps into the street and begins dancing uncontrollably. What happens next will shock you. So, yeah, she's out there, she's dancing in the streets. Eventually, she collapses from exhaustion.
As
Understandable,
one
I feel
does.
like, right?
Yep.
She catches a splash, gets a little bit of water in her, probably actually some sort of beer, I would imagine at this point. People are not drinking water. And she gets a breather and resumes her frenzied dancing.
Hmm.
Within days, about 30 people had joined in. And at this point, community, municipal, religious leaders, they're like, what? the fuck is going on? And to me, I think that's reasonable. I too would be like, what the fuck is going on? And so some of the thinking here was like, hey, maybe they just got to get this dancing out of their system, right? Let's hire some musicians. Let's hire some dancers. The dancers will help them. Maybe if they get some good dance moves going, maybe if they get some good tunes going, they'll get the bug out. Unfortunately, the mysterious compulsion only spread to around 400 people, which I feel like is the obvious thing that would have happened. Free ads. By September, the mysterious compulsions began to slow down, but several people apparently, allegedly, died from injuries and exhaustion before it finally stopped. And so overall, the documentation for this is pretty good, which is cool and kind of crazy. But the death part is disputed because some sources that were emerged later, not contemporary sources, cite 15 deaths per day, which is just not possible, really. Like, it's not really sustainable for a village at that time. But the contemporary sources don't really mention that.
Yeah. So this was really interesting to me. I listened to a really interesting podcast that I hadn't heard of before called Not Just Tutors.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've listened to them a few times for this.
Okay. Awesome.
And just in general, yeah, they're good.
I listened to their episode on this, and that's Professor Lipscomb, and she is joined by someone, Dr. Lynette Miller Renberg. Excuse me. And Dr. Renberg talks about this. I don't know if she's written anything on it, but this is clearly her area of study. So it was very interesting. She talks about, like, this is where I think it's so interesting, the way they respond, the way the community and religious and civil leaders responded to this, and like why they thought it was happening is so different. Like, it's so fascinating to me that it is so just drastically different from the way they handle witch trials, witch accusations.
Especially because a woman, like, kind of started it. I'm not blaming her, obviously, but there was one woman,
and she's not charged of anything. There's no mention of her, like, after it ends. Like, the only reason she's written is because she is the first one. There's a physician is there, and he's like the village physician is like, and I mean, in fairness, Strasbourg wasn't just like a village. I don't think at that time. Like, I think it was a rather large city, and like the Renberg talks about is like that this doctor said, like, posited that this woman started it at first because she was like doing it to annoy her husband. Which I was like, that actually is kind of believable, but
I was like, that could either be sexist or
both.
He might be onto something.
It's both. It's definitely, even if it's true, it's still like sexist.
He's out of line, but he's right.
He's out of line, but he's right. So that was very funny to me hearing that. But then there's this whole thing that's happening leading up to this time where, like, dancing started being seen as like a distinctly, like, it's a woman's thing, and it's dancing is a women's thing, and it is not inherently evil, but very easy to become evil.
So you're telling me it was Footloose?
So it was Footloose, is exactly right. Music, dancing, it's all bad news. So there's like all of that. But then even with that, they were still like, no, it's not a religious problem. These aren't demons. They're ill. They're sick.
Yeah.
We gotta, like, get the bad blood out. And, like,
their blood is hot.
They have, so they, like, at one point they say the treatment is to make them dance more.
Which is so funny. Like, we need to give them backup dancers and music.
Literally, they like have people come with fiddles. They were like, "Oh, go so dance crazy with them to like keep like." It was so unhinged. And then there was one point they like had all the people in the village like everyone had to take a dancing person into their home to try and like confine them in a cool,
Hmm.
dark space. And then finally, I guess, and this is where like the people dying question mark comes in, is like
Hmm.
the argument that Dr. Renberg makes is like it became such a problem that they finally were like, "Okay, we're going to try the saints. We're going to try the
Hmm.
religious treatment." And they like dipped their shoes in holy oil or whatever and like walked them
They,
around some shrine of some saint.
gosh,
And they
was it
were
Saint
fine.
Vitus or Vitus?
I don't remember probably
Okay,
if
but
any of those were never. There was like it was like the patron saint of
of dancing.
dancing, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so really quick side note, there what one of the theories was that apparently he had the power to curse people with dance.
Oh,
I don't know if that was his miracle. I didn't. I pulled up his Wikipedia page. There was too much. I said I'm not that interested. But he had the power to curse people apparently. So that was one of the
dope.
theories, is that he had cursed them to dance.
That sounds fun.
Which, how is that not like, how is that a saint behavior?
Right. How is that? That's what I'm like.
Like, I
That
curse
doesn't
you.
feel
Like,
very saint-like. He had to have been. I'm curious what the origin of that saint is. Which
I don't,
culture?
it was like the
Um,
300s.
I know I'm wondering which. Yeah, the 300s is when he became a Christian saint, but what was
Yeah,
he before that? Because
a
that's a
dancer probably.
very pagan thing to curse. Like,
He was probably like, if I had to guess, he was a lover, he was a fighter.
the other thing that I thought was really interesting about the dance mechanic was
Hmm.
something. Oh, there's, I guess, a theory now that like the dance was it was like a demonstration. It was
Hmm.
protest, which I think is really interesting.
I think that makes the most sense.
Agreed.
And they were
As
just
long as
pretending
no one
to
was
be,
dying.
yeah. Even if, I mean, if they, I did see
If
people
15
dying, I
people a
guess, but
day were dying, that
no,
seems
yeah, that's,
super unlikely.
yes, yes. But if
But
like
I
a few
agree.
people died, which is what I think most people think happened,
Yeah.
um, but I don't know what the podcast you listen to. I don't know what the expert on it says. I would defer to them.
Yeah, she doesn't say one way or the other for sure. She just notes that
Hmm.
like that is one of the things that is said is like 15 people die. So,
Because the other modern theories to me that I found were like the the ergo fungi poisoning, where they ingested the fungi that was on rye, which
mm,
is known to cause convulsions, right? But it's convulsions. It's not known to cause dancing that persists for weeks on end.
right. I feel like they would have been like
And
a fit. They would have been like, oh, the
yes,
whole town's overcome with fits, right? Like, I don't
yes.
think that they would have said it was a dancing plague if that's what it was.
And then this is where I was a little bit like, I feel like mass hysteria doesn't really exist, and it's just a cop out for when scientists or researchers or doctors can't figure out what the fuck's going on. Because they're basically just like, I don't know, man, mass hysteria. And it's like, thank you for that helpful insight.
Well, so like, yes, and I feel like
Yeah.
this is a really interesting example because like, do we think that every single one of those people was actively, consciously protesting something? Every
Hmm.
person in the village that like started dancing, do we really think that like that was a conscious active protest
Hmm.
on every single person's behalf, or did people get caught up in the way
Yeah.
that they like think about like march and protests that like devolve or
Hmm.
um any mass movement like that, or like a couple of people get involved in like with just like for shits and giggles and it goes off the rails.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree. The dancing played was very, very interesting.
Yeah. Anyways, I like that podcast too. Definitely gotta listen to more of those.
Yeah. I was excited when you brought it up. So it is also interesting that the 1518 dancing plate of Strasbourg was not the only dancing plate in history, or even the only one in the Holy Roman Empire, but it is the best documented. And one thing that we know for sure is that the dancing plate was definitively not caused by the release of unrelated Belgian techno anthem Pump Up the Jam.
God damn it. Oh, it's for Anna.
And that brings us to the Great New England Vampire Panic, which I did ask you not to research
I know, I'm
because
really
it's
excited to hear about
fucking
it.
crazy.
I didn't look up a single thing. I'm
So
not
this is
looking
the
at the
one.
notes.
This is the one because I was just like, New Englanders are so crazy, man. Like, what are we up to? What are we
Yeah.
doing? And I'm not. New York is kind of left out of all the different regions. It's like carved up. I feel like, but anyway,
Hmm.
this is the kind of like it's mass hysteria. It's just fucking crazy. Big takeaways here. The panic was caused by tuberculosis, aka consumption, which was rampant in New England in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Mm.
One of the articles I read said that between 1786 and 1800, which is not necessarily the hot time of the vampire panic, but it overlaps. The disease killed 2% of the region's population in 14 years. That's pretty
Wow.
crazy. And it's,
That's
it's not modern medicine by any stretch, but it's not like the worst medicine has ever been, and people are just dropping like flies.
mm-hmm.
People with the disease get sicker and sicker and like visibly diminish as the disease progresses. I think that's one of the main things, that they get skinnier, weaker, and sicklier as it goes on.
And they're coughing
And
up.
it also, because it's a lung disease, they're coughing up blood and whatnot,
Yeah.
it spreads rapidly through families. The other thing we want to keep in mind is that while the superstition and the panic are commonalities shared with witch trials, and the kind of the desperation, I think, and the like, we have to do something. As
Mm-hmm.
far as we know, nobody that was alive was accused of being a vampire and killed. It was all dead
Mm.
people.
Interesting.
The other thing I would think is important to keep in mind is that this continued, 1700s, you're like, that's kind of weird. 1800s, the most famous case happened in 1892, which is like, we have telegraphs. We have trains. We had fought a whole fucking civil war to preserve the Union. We have armored ships. We have steam engines, like
Mm-hmm.
vampires.
What did you say? 1890 what?
1892.
Okay.
Incredible
My
stuff.
great grandmother born in 1899. That's why I was wondering.
Cassie's great grandmother was almost born, for crying out loud.
We'll cut that part,
Before
obviously.
we,
I thought you said 1899. I was like, yeah,
okay,
the
no,
person I'm named after her.
huh? Before we get there, though, imagine this: it's 1990. You're in Connecticut. You're playing with your friends. You stumble across some cool-looking rocks, but guess what? They're not rocks. They're actually stoles. And you know what that means, right? You're smart. You've seen Goonies. You know what finding a stole means.
Treasure.
There's pirate treasure. There
Yep,
is pirate treasure.
100%.
So you go. You hop on your bicycle, pedal, pedal, pedal. You go and tell your mom, "Hey, mom, found some dead bodies in a field and there's pirate treasure. Can I borrow a shovel?" She's like, "That's nice, sweetie. You didn't find a dead body though. Like, you're not gonna bring my shovel to some random field." He goes, "Bam! Here's a skull." So that is a real thing that happened. I embellished a little bit. Kids did stumble across a field full of bones. They thought it was pirate treasure. One of them told their mom,
Oh my
who did
God,
not
that's
believe them until
so
they
funny.
produced a skull.
100% relatable.
Cops. So there was a serial killer in the area. Cops are like, "We
Shit.
just found his dumping ground. This is crazy." So they rope it off. But the bones are crumbling and brown. They're decaying. And so the Connecticut state archaeologist is brought in. And so he discovers, eventually, he finds the plots, he's going through it. And eventually, after talking to people at the Smithsonian, learns about the vampire panics of New England and the Jewett City vampires. So this is probably, there's a bunch of unmarked family plots throughout New England, throughout the country, throughout the world, I'm sure. That's just how people were burying people back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this one, most of them were simple wooden caskets that are buried very cheaply, like very little clothing, no jewelry, just laid to rest, their hands at their sides.
Mm-hmm.
But two of them were buried in stone crypts. And one of them, the one buried in plot 4, is very interesting. So that crypt was emblazoned with the initials JB in brass. And it wasn't old Chad Burton. But what the archaeologists found still shook the pillars of heaven. So JB's bones were not laid out naturally like the rest of his kin, but they were rearranged. So like the feet and bottom half, perfectly normal. Actually not the rest. Sorry, just the feet were perfectly normal. The rest had been completely rearranged. So JB
Ew.
had been beheaded. His skull and thigh bones were on top of his ribs and vertebrae, and his ribs were cracked open.
Ew.
The archaeologist described it as looking like the stolen crossbones Jolly Roger motif when he opened it up. He said he'd never seen anything like that. And again,
Huh.
are we sure there was not pirate treasure?
I
Like, are we absolutely
mean,
positive?
really, I feel like we have been misled here and they found
I
treasure
know.
and
Like,
didn't tell
is it
anyone.
under the stone crypt? I bet he did.
100%.
JB, or yeah, archaeologists were on to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where things get interesting because at first it's like, okay, grave robbers, no big deal. But as it turns out, at the same time that JB died, the Jewett City vampires were active. And that's basically the Jewett City vampire panic. And so now we're going to get into what exactly these vampire panics look like. And essentially, it starts at, like I said, tons of New Englanders. They're getting tuberculosis. They're getting scary sick. It's terrifying, visually deteriorating, and especially families. So the thinking became that the deceased relatives of those suffering from consumption were returning from the grave to drain the blood and life force of their relatives nightly. So eventually, just people were scared, terrified, driven by that desperation. The families would often eventually relent or be forced to exhume the bodies of their dead kin. And depending on their state, they would remove and burn the heart and decapitate and burn the body sometimes as well. Sometimes they would
Jesus.
just like exhume the body and turn it over, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
There were different rituals depending on which areas were doing it, but
Mm-hmm.
the most kind of dramatic was the removing and burning the heart, and that's clearly what happened to JB. Like he was beheaded, bones rearranged for some reason, like heart
Right.
removed. So, which obviously, has no effect, and people kept dying of tuberculosis, which is why we got the movie Tombstone.
God, so good.
Got to move out west for the desert air.
I'm your huckleberry.
So, author and folklorist.
Hang on, time out. When we talk about New England, where are we talking about specifically?
It's basically everything east and north of New York.
No, I mean, like actually, like I know where New England is. I'm saying
What are you talking about?
where in New England? There's
Where these are
a
happening?
billion states.
No,
in New
so
England, so like
it was the whole thing. It was all of them. Like Rhode Island, Connecticut were two of the biggest ones,
okay,
but Vermont,
that
Maine,
tracks.
New Hampshire,
Rhode
like the
Island,
full fucking thing.
Rhode Island's fucking
But
crazy.
Rhode Island and Connecticut were two of the biggest ones. You know what I will say though, and actually no, that was Connecticut. Never mind. Rhode Island though. I don't know if you can see the book still, but founded by religious non-bigots, I believe.
Non-bigots. So you said
I believe they were kicked out of being Puritans because they were too egalitarian.
that tracks. Rhode Islanders are just like live and let live, man.
And something. Okay. So author and folklorist Michael Bell, and he's like, I don't know if he's a PhD academic, but he approached us from an academic point of view, not an outlandish point of view, and he wrote a book on this. He apparently refuses to watch Twilight and Buffy and all those because he doesn't. He's like annoyed that people think vampires are silly.
No one thinks they're silly. We think they're cool. What are you talking about?
That's what he means that's silly.
Well, I think he's
Anyway.
silly.
Sorry, Michael Bell, you're on blast.
That's amazing. I'm rewatching it right now.
So he wrote this book. He found evidence of at least 80 vampire-related exhumations, ranging from the late 1700s to the late 1800s. Most were concentrated, like I said, in those New England states, Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire, Rhode Island specifically. But they stretch as far west as Minnesota. So shout out Words and Whiskey. And like I said, the craziest thing about this to me is that it kept happening into like the 1892 is the most famous case.
That's bonkers.
Which, to be fair, that is an outlier because I believe a German scientist discovered the bacterium that caused tuberculosis in 1882, and then from there, that information was dispersed, and people were like, "Okay, calm down."
Right.
But this one is kind of sad, and I think that explains. Well, it's actually very sad, and I think that explains why this happened. So, 1892 in Exeter, Rhode Island. A farmer named George Brown watched first his wife and then two daughters die of tuberculosis in rapid succession. And then his son, Edwin, became deathly ill, and it's the last of his family alive. So he wanted no part of the ritual. I don't it doesn't seem like he really believed that his family had turned into vampires and were preying on the rest of the family besides him, I guess. But eventually they persuaded him to exhume the bodies of his wife and daughters. And so one of the daughters and his wife were just bones. They had already decayed to nothing. But Mercy, the most recent family member to die just 2 months prior, was surprisingly intact. You know, they described her, I don't think gooey is the word, but gooey and moist is how I'm going to say it. And they noted that her fingernails and hair had grown despite her death. So the reasons for that is that she died in the middle of winter and was partially preserved by the frigid temperatures. So that's why she hadn't decayed as much as she should have in theory. And the fingernails and hair appearing to have grown was a trick because her flesh had retracted around them. So armed with this ironclad evidence, the villagers were like, we got her, vampire. So they cut out her heart and burned it. And then for good measure, they mixed it. Well, no, yeah. They had Edwin drink the ashes in hopes that he'd recover. Not long after, Edwin died. Yeah, they should have just sent him to fucking Colorado.
Exactly.
So there's also, this is quotes from Henry David Thoreau that I pulled from the Wikipedia page, full disclosure, but there are some contemporary reactions. And Thoreau wrote, "The savage in man is never quite eradicated. I have just read of a family in Vermont who several of its members having died of consumption just burned the lungs and heart and liver of the last diseased in order to prevent any more from having it." So that's just another example of some of the rituals. Apparently when some of the rural Rhode Islanders moved into Connecticut, locals called them uneducated and vicious because Rhode Islanders were especially famous for their vampire beliefs.
Tracks.
And newspapers at the time, this is notable because a lot of the time, especially local rural newspapers, would exaggerate stories to sell more. They were skeptical of vampirism. Now, it's also, there's an allegorical story that after Bram Stoker had died, that he had newspaper clippings of the Mercy Brown case in his possession. And so the idea, I guess, behind that is that allegedly Bram Stoker was inspired by the New England vampire panic to write about Dracula, or to create Dracula, which there's also the rumor, because he really fucked heavy with Teddy Roosevelt, I guess they were boys, that the cowboy in Dracula was inspired by Teddy Roosevelt.
I love that theory.
Which I'm just like, I know there's already the very kitschy Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, which
I've never seen or read.
The movie sucks. The book is like, I haven't reread it as a sentient person, but as a high schooler, I loved. I was like, that shit's awesome. And it's written, it's like, it's not just like, fuck yeah, Abraham Lincoln was a vampire hunter. Like, it's played straight, is what I would say.
I've heard Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is quite good.
It's the same guy.
Book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so I feel like that tracks. I started watching that. You know this. I think other people have figured it out. I do not fuck with zombie movies. B is downstairs right now watching 28 Days Later.
Let's fucking go. Is he going to watch 28 Years Later?
I don't think he even knows it's coming out or is out.
Oh my God, it's out.
Oh yeah, you saw it this week,
come
right?
Through. I did. Anyway.
Yeah.
So from one literary icon to another, because our next our next mass hysteria, mass panic example is the War of the Worlds radio play.
Yes.
So this one's interesting because it's 1938, and my understanding after researching this is that it happened to an extent, but really the lasting legacy is the result of media beefs between traditional and new media.
That tracks.
And so the War of the Worlds radio play was an adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. It was told as a series of news bulletins about a Martian invasion of the world, and specifically for our purposes, and for the purposes of the broadcast, the events unfolded from a landing in New Jersey and America's under attack. I believe in the novel, it's Europe-based. So, and apparently, we're led to believe, we're told, people lost their shit all across the United States. Like, traffic accidents, people are like driving into ditches, slamming into each other. There's mass panic. There's suicides and deaths as a result of this. There's like mass stampedes. Because people miss the opening of the broadcast where they're like, the events you are about to hear never happened. They are a play from H.G. Wells, adapted by the brilliant mind of Orson Welles. Enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was a fairly good,
That was
unplanned,
an excellent, like, 1930s radio accent. That was really
off the dome.
Excellent. Well done.
Thank you. But
See,
so people,
when you ad-lib, things go great. You just need to do it more often.
Were convinced the United States is under attack by Martians. And there is some truth. That's so funny. It's just so crazy. But there is some truth to it. And it's also funny because, like, that's such a good idea to just do a radio play of that. But Orson Welles was cooking.
Is like it's a really good idea.
I really wanted to do something like that on, like, in a podcast format. I think it would be cool. And I think there are some, or even the original radio play, I think, is on some podcast apps or YouTube or something.
I'm sure. That's
and
so
just like
cool.
It's so cool. Anyway, so people did freak out, but most of that freaking out entailed what would you do if you thought Martians were invading? They called the police. Hey, is this real? They called the government agencies. Is this real? They called the paper. They called the radio station. Is this real? And so, also though, the police did apparently storm CBS's New York City office to shut down the broadcast, according to some of the pages and actors. And the page boys were like fighting the cops to get them to stop, to not like shut down the broadcast live. So that's kind of funny.
That's wild. You know,
Yes.
You just know it's like, you know, Pulitzer and what is the other guy's name?
Hertz.
Hertz.
I'm going off Newsies, so I don't know. But
yeah, obviously. But that's what I'm picturing. I'm picturing like the Pulitzer and Hertz of the Newsies,
and then,
like trying to take out the radio by like getting the cops to go, like using the excuse and like being like, "Cops, go shut this down. It's completely out of control." Like
but that's basically what happened. But now, based off that, though, I'm picturing like Brooklyn, the little kid with the cane that was beating dudes up. He's now a page boy,
yeah,
and he's just like beating dudes up. They're like, "Brooklyn's here." Anyway, but the reports of people killing themselves, freaking out in the streets, stampedes. That was caused because the reporters, they're getting thousands of people calling them, and they're like, there must be a mass panic in the streets. So they just made that shit up. And there were occasional, like, people were freaking out. So there were cases where, like, someone freaked out and was running through the streets talking about Martians invading, and then people followed them. Or, like, people were banging on the doors of their local city hall trying to figure out if it was true. Or, like, someone did get in a car accident in traffic while listening to the radio play. But the nation
like looking
wasn't
out their
gripped.
windshield trying to be like, are there Martians?
But the nation, well, this also predated like flying saucers. So it's not, I don't think people would have been like, they were probably just looking out the window. Anyway, but like we're kind of told, and if you've heard of this, I think you're expecting that the entire nation was gripped by this fear. And that is not what happened.
Yeah.
So some of the causes are similar to what we've heard in the witch trials and other mass panic hysteria events. People were very freaked out in general. You know, it's 1938. We're almost out of the Great Depression, but the preceding decade, it's been grim. It's bleak. It's difficult, right? The specter of war with Germany looms large. People are like, so some of the people who heard it, they thought Germany had invaded. They were hearing these, because there's gas attacks in there and things like that. So people are like, Germany's invaded the United States. But yeah, in this time of heightened stress and fear of invasion, people took what they thought to be news reports at face value. But as the decades have wound on, it has become clear that the reports of panic well outpace the actual genuine panic, and that newspapers are responsible for the exaggerated reports and lasting legacy.
Fucking fake
because
news,
radio
man.
was a growing threat to the media dominance of newspapers, and they were starting to gain momentum with advertisers. And so what better way to demonstrate the foolishness, the untrustworthiness of radios by the fact that they caused this insane nationwide panic that killed, I'm hearing reports of hundreds, if not thousands of people dead in the streets, and millions panicked. And you know who wouldn't do that? You know who wouldn't cause nationwide panics? Your trustworthy local paper, who certainly would never publish a mistruth, let alone a fairy tale. We're not making up stories. Certainly wouldn't drag people to war. That's crazy. Who would do that?
Certainly not.
Apparently, there were over 12,500 articles printed about the War of the Worlds broadcast in the 3 weeks following. And Hitler would reference it in a speech about the degenerative effects of democracy on morals and the general corruption of democracy on people.
Wow.
So I don't know if he was just being like, see, you guys don't want democracy. It makes you fucking dumb. But yeah.
He's over here being like, see, this is what happens when you don't have state-run media.
That is probably what he said. Oh, man. But yeah, those were all the kind of vaguely mass panics that I had added to our list to talk about.
I think it's really interesting. Like, again, I'm just going to come back to the fact that, like, they were handled so very differently than the witch trials. And it's like, why? You know?
Yeah, that is one of the things I wanted to get at. Is like, what is the difference here?
What is the common difference? Can't quite put my finger on it. I mean, yeah, I think it's interesting, especially, like, again, the dancing panic being the one where I'm like, no, seriously, why? Like,
yeah,
in that situation, legitimately, what's the difference? Because, like, was it just because? Well, actually, one of the arguments that the woman on the podcast, the doctor on the guest on the podcast made was that it was because it wasn't just women, just a certain type of woman who was involved in the dancing plague, that made them, or made it difficult to say, oh, it's this versus a medical reason. Like, you can't say it's a spiritual thing if it's not all women, or it's not all young women, or it's not all old women, or whatever. Like, there were men, there were children, there was, like, every kind of person in the city got involved.
So yeah, you couldn't label one specific out group, and that's
the only group that wasn't involved necessarily were, like, the clergy or the people in power, which again lends itself to the argument that it was probably a protest against poor conditions. I guess right around this time there was, like, low crop yield and fears of famine.
Yeah, but it's still, I think it is interesting. And if it had happened like 40 years later, it's definitely a witch hunt.
Right. Like, she absolutely, if she's, like, dancing by herself, she's definitely a witch.
Yeah, and it would have been the devil's afoot making everyone dance and doesn't want you to be productive or whatever nonsense.
Anyways,
this is fun. So
this is really interesting. I love the New England vampires.
I know, just in the 1800s, digging up graves and burning people. Normal behavior.
Looney Tunes.
So do we want to do The Will of the Many before or after what we're Highkey Obsessed with, so that people who haven't read it?
Let's do what we're Highkey Obsessed with, and then we'll get into The Will of the Many. That way people can stop listening if they have not yet read The Will of the Many.
Okay. So that brings us to this week. We're Highkey Obsessed with...
You go first. I didn't think about it.
Okay. So I have two. One is that for the last several weeks, the NBA has just been very consuming of my after work time, because it's been the NBA playoffs, it's been the NBA finals, and then we had the NBA draft, and it was an excellent NBA playoffs. Often, the last several years, teams have broken down, and it's been like maybe the right team won, but their path wasn't great to get there, or like there were too many blowouts, or there were one-off close games, but overall the series weren't very close. This year, not the case. Lots of close games. The finals went to 7 games, and the team that represented the East was not supposed to be there. They just went on a hot streak and were like so fun, so infectious. And then their best player, who was nicknamed the Haliban because he's a fucking terrorist, and it's kind of accurate. He, a basketball terrorist, he, the like, what the hell? What the helly? That song's about him. What the Halliburton? That's
No,
Tyrese
I don't know
Halliburton.
that song.
Anyway, he tore his Achilles, which is like
Is
the
he the
worst
kid that
basketball
got hurt
injury.
at the very end?
At the very end, it was like screaming on the ground.
We were at the beach bar. No,
Mhm.
this was like this week, right?
It was
or last weekend.
Last weekend.
Yeah, I don't remember where we were, but B like looked up on the screen, like saw it happen, or like showed me a video. I can't remember. It was just like this is like the star player. This is the last seconds of the game. Like, right? It was like the very end of the game.
No, it was like the start of the game. So
he came off the last game, right?
Yeah, it was the last game of the season, and he's out all next year. That's how this works. Like, he's probably gonna be out next year, diminished the next year, and it sucks because he was their engine.
It does,
and he was good. He was balling out of his mind. He hit 2 like crazy fuck you threes, or 3 maybe. He was just going off.
Yeah.
And it ended up not being a very close game.
Stacks and stacks of money to console him.
He does. He did already signed his like big contract too.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even like he's on his rookie deal.
He's fine.
That's fine.
I mean, obviously it's very sad. Like, I feel I watched the clip and I was like, it like pulled at my heartstrings watching him like
but then you're like
that.
But he is getting paid like $30 million a year, so
right.
It's gonna be all right. It's gonna be all right. And like the best medical care you can get. Anyway, the other thing I'm obsessed with, and I'm not going to get into too many details, is 28 years later. It is the follow-up, obviously, to 28 days later, kind of a follow-up to 28 weeks later. It is
what is
the original
relationship?
Team.
Okay.
So 28 days later is the original one. It's pre-fame Cillian Murphy, pre-fame Naomi Harris.
Oh, I know. I've seen both 28 days and 28 weeks.
Oh, okay.
I've seen them. I just ain't gonna watch them again.
So 28 weeks or 28 days later is one of my favorite movies. It's so fucking good.
Weeks is the one that does Weeks end with them running through the tunnel, or does that days?
28 weeks later ends with them running through Paris.
It ends with the zombies running through the tunnel into France.
No, that's a different thing. There is a tunnel scene where they run in a tunnel, but they get to France, but it's by helicopter.
Maybe I just stopped watching because I was like, I'm done.
The tunnel scene is very scary. So, and then 28 weeks later, it's kind of like, it's not that good, but it's so good because 28 days later is so good that any of the DNA that makes it into it lifts the rest of the product up.
Yeah.
And it's basically America under the guise of NATO comes to help England resettle and then fucks it up.
Tracks.
And that's also, it's like Rose Byrne, Jeremy Renner, Idris Elba. In the kids are now famous. David Carlisle.
What year was that?
2007?
That was like
2007, 2008?
Is weeks or days?
Weeks. 20.
Really? Jesus.
I think so. 28 days later was 2002. But anyway, so the original, like the creative team was involved in that, but not entirely responsible for it. They were executive producers, and Danny Boyle, who directed 28 Days Later, directed like the opening scene, which is, I think, pretty notably better than the rest of the movie for the most part. But then they came back, and they're both like famous and successful now. Like Alex Garland wrote it. He's gone on to have a whole career. He directed a bunch of movies. He directed most recently Warfare and Civil War, and does a bunch of like cool sci-fi things. I think he wrote and directed Ex Machina. And so they're fucking weird, right? They're weird filmmakers. And so 28 Days Later, it has that artsy kind of vibe to it. 28 years later, it's fucking it's weird in an entirely different way than 28 Days Later, but it is still awesome. And the parts that
it's got to do more to be considered weird now.
Yeah, I loved it though. It's excellent. It's fucking crazy.
I haven't watched either. Like, I watched both 28 Days and 28 Weeks in college. And have not ever watched them since. So.
Get a blanket and rewatch 28 Days Later. Okay.
No.
What are you hiking?
I watched 98% of it facing away from the television.
It's so
I remember
good.
It was like my senior. It was my. I actually have like a vivid memory because I'm in my senior year of college, and so I'm like in the house. I lived with 3 guys, and they were watching it, and I like sat facing the window so I could see the reflection of the TV.
That was probably even scarier.
No, because I could watch them and kind of get the gist of what was happening without having to like see the zombie gore.
They're fucking
I
like
watched the
masters
first-
of tension. The whole series, it's like you're tense.
Yeah. Well, in like the very beginning, like of 28 weeks, where like, and I like, I started really sad to me. Like, I was just like, I don't like this. I don't want.
Yeah.
She like survived all of that. Anyways,
Hold on, I had something. I had to follow up. I don't remember. Okay.
Well, I was saying that you have to do more. You have to do more for your film to be considered weird these days, I think, or groundbreaking, or what other ground is left to break.
I don't think it was that vibe. I just think that they're now like they can do whatever the fuck they want, and so they took advantage of it more so than they were like, oh, we have to up the ante. I think it was just like we're weird dudes who have now been so successful, and this series is so beloved that we can kind of be like, fuck you a little bit and do what we want. But
kind of like, can you hear my cat?
I can.
Oh my god, Cricket! Hi, baby, shush.
So what I was going to say is that one of my best friends got. So the movie 28 Days Later, for whatever reason, you could not buy in the United States for a long time on Blu-ray or digital for like years. And my friend got me a copy for my wedding gift from eBay from England and made sure that it would work in the United States. So there's different Blu-ray players and stuff like that. And then like 6 months later, it's available on digital.
Oh,
it was just kind of funny.
No.
But I was like, that's so awesome.
Well, that's what they're saying about the re-release of Dogma, right? Like it's going to reduce the value of all those people that spent like $400 to get a DVD. Which that also...
I don't think he didn't pay an outlandish amount because it was available across the world. But
I'm very hyped about Dogma being more easily accessible.
I think
I have not seen that movie in a minute.
That's Kevin Smith, right?
Yes.
I think that's like that's the different millennial thing of us, is that like I haven't seen many Kevin Smith things. It's not that I don't like him, I just haven't really sought it out.
I am not a Jay and Silent Bob girly. Like that is the only movie with Jay and Silent Bob that I think is remotely funny or good. But Dogma is, I can't overstate enough how much I think that you would fuck with Dogma.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But what are you obsessed with?
I won't say that's my Highkey Obsessed for this week, but I fucking love that movie. I mean, Alanis Morissette as God. How do you top that, right? Isn't that her?
Wait, what? What was it?
Hang on. Fact checking myself right now.
Oh, and Dogma, you mean?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So she's she plays like at the end of the movie, she is God in Dogma. She comes out, she like doesn't say anything, like she plays God. And it's just so, maybe it wouldn't feel as perfect watching it now without all the cultural, moment, but like so funny. Okay. What am I Highkey obsessed with this week? I'm Highkey obsessed with Lilith Max. It's music. She's a musician. She's like 90% of my feminine rage playlist these days.
Oh.
She sings a song, is it Bear and Wolves or Wolves and Bear? It's actually, I don't remember. Bears and Wolves.
Wolves?
And it is like, I will always choose the bear.
Mm.
And it's so good. She has a number of really excellent songs. So like that's one thing I'm Highkey obsessed with this week. I also recently finished the second book in the Sword Catcher series by Cassandra Clare. It's her new, I think it's going to be a trilogy. And not a ton of people have read it. So I'm begging you, internet friends, that if you have read The Ragpicker King, which is the second book in the series, to please contact me so we can talk about it, because I really loved it. It's kind of, I don't know if I'm reading it wrong, but it's giving like Castellan Castellanian, like Spain vibes as like the setting. It's giving like, especially there's like they're not Jewish. They're called, it's a sect of people that like have their own city within the city. They're only allowed to wear certain colors when they're outside of their little city within the city. They're the only people that are allowed to use magic, and it's like small healing magic stuff. And then there's the city and the king. There's like there's politics and the sort of nobility, but they're like merchant nobility, and like them and their politicking to like take power from the king. And then there's the like international politics and the like marriage contracts. And then there's a little bit of magic. There's will they, won't they's between like 3 different couples. It's great. It's fun. There's sword fighting, swashbuckling.
Ooh.
A pirate just turned up at the end of the second book, and I'm like so hyped for the third book. There's this like desert prince guy. He's giving, Arabian Nights vibes, I think, probably for the second book, because they're off on a quest to find something out magical.
And did you say it was called the Rat Picker King?
No, sorry. The Rag, R-A-G, Rag Picker is one word. The Rag Picker King. So the first book is called The Sword Catcher.
Pretty good. Mm-hmm.
Like, so there's like, the premise is like, there's this role in the court called the Sword Catcher, but no one really knows he exists. He is posing as the cousin of the prince, but really and there's this like magical medallion that like if they think there's a credible threat to the prince's life at some function, the sword catcher dresses as like wears the medallion and magically transforms into the prince. So like everyone, if they don't know it's him, they perceive him as the prince. But if they know that this person is the prince, or is himself, they perceive him as he really is. So like it's all about like perception warping too, and like there's all this stuff about like privilege and like lack of privilege and education and women being kept out of education and like the role of women. It does a lot, which is classic Cassandra Clare. I'm probably starting to yell because I'm getting excited, but like this is one thing I will say is like, Cassandra Clare writes long. Her books are long. They are chonky. They are heavy. They're not like heavy, like Dark Age heavy or anything like that. But the first book ended and I was like, did anything happen? And the answer is not really. But it still was so good. So like it's very much, her books are very character driven. They're very much about like the relationships and the conversations and the things that the characters are learning about themselves and about their world and et cetera. But there's never any info dumping, which I think she does a fabulous job of like slowly building out this world in a way that like you don't feel like you're missing information necessarily, and then you get more information about the world. So like it's like you learn more about, as like babies learn more a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
They don't know that they don't know something. They just perceive their world more and more as they live. It's like that. Reading her books is like that, which I think is like just excellent world building.
Okay. And is it like she wrote the City of Bones series, right?
Yes. So Cassandra Clare is the author of is the new book YA?
Well, the City of Bones is YA.
City of Bones is YA, yes. So City of Bones, Mortal Instruments, so like all of her, that's all in one world, which is our world, but it's all like the Shadowhunter story. This is completely separate from that. Completely new world, completely new characters, everything, which is very cool. And I would say, yes, it's still YA.
Okay.
I don't know if hang on. Let me just double check that because I feel like it's YA, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is.
I feel like a lot of, and this might be a good segue actually, I feel like a lot of modern fantasy has, even if it's not officially like the grim, dark, and depressing type of, I forget what the actual like philosophy is called. If it's not nihilistic, it's still like that's permeated so far into modern fantasy that anything that is mostly like kind of or traditional fantasy where there's a clear good guy and bad guy and all that is broad brush labeled as YA, if that makes sense.
Oh, well, especially if it's written by a woman. Oh, yeah. They had to come up with a new genre.
Come on, man.
Of fantasy. Like, they had to come up with a new adult because they couldn't just call something written by a woman fantasy.
I wasn't
That's
tapped
like
in. I apologize.
Legitimately what had, like, Sarah J. Maas.
New
like,
adult.
And look, I like Sarah J. Maas's books.
Mm-hmm.
I think she has a lot to answer for as a human. Like, they would never, like, her books were always classified YA, and then she started writing pretty sexy shit, and so they were like, oh, we can't market it as YA if it's full of sex.
Word.
So they came up with a new adult. I'm not saying that she's that her books were the invention of the genre, but
even like the romantasy, I feel like is kind of a similar thing. I've always been confused if it was, because some people use it as a demerit.
Yeah, 100%. And now romantasy, I feel like, is just that is the marriage of two genres or a subgenre of romance. I would not call it a subgenre of fantasy necessarily. Like, where there's romantic fantasy and romantasy. Or excuse me, fantasy, romance, and romantasy. Like, romantasy is like the fourth wing where there's a story and a world that's been built, and like the romance is not the point, but the romance is heavy. That's romantasy, which is where I would say it's like a subgenre of fantasy, whereas romantic fantasy, or excuse me, fantasy romance is romance set in a fantasy setting, whereas the romance is the point.
Yes, and people lump them together and act like romantasy, the romance is the point often. And by people, I mean haters and
haters
looking
do
to
that.
Specifically like to undermine and belittle romantasy and be like, it's not real fantasy. I want the world building. I want this. I want that. And it's like, that's there.
Right. Okay. No, she says they say it's adult fantasy novel.
Okay.
In the overview, which I think is fair. So like and that's the reason I was hesitating is there's like a lot of scenes that take place in a brothel. But like, it's not, and like in this second book, there's a bit more sexy time. But like throughout, there was never a part where I was like, "Ooh, this is spicy," you know?
Gotcha.
Not that sex is the only thing that makes something adult, like the content, but like I don't consider the like moral dilemmas or problems that these pretty young adults, they're adults, but they are young, are like up against. I don't consider them any more difficult than like a lot of the stuff from YA, personally.
Word. Okay. Anywho, we're going to get into
like a good segue.
Yes, we're going to get into a spoiler, probably not spoiler heavy, but spoiler included discussion of The Will of the Many from here on out.
Mine's definitely going to be spoiler heavy, so yeah.
Okay. I was mostly just going to give you the floor and respond to you. And then I took a screenshot of your Instagram post about it, your mini review. Do you still have that? Because it's on my phone and I can't, the phone's my camera.
Oh yeah. Hold it, please.
But so
I highlighted it on my.
I'll filibuster a little bit. The Will of the Many is a much beloved, I guess, it's hyped. Very ballyhooed, very, 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 very hyped. And a lot of our book friends that we cherish their opinions have fucking lauded it. They've been like, this thing is gasoline. It's awesome. Yeah. For me, I was like, pretty good. Didn't hit like that for me. Like, I don't need to read the next one. I probably will, because it was like, it got over that barrier, but I wasn't like, oh my God, when is the next book out?
Yeah. I would say there's 3 parts. Part 1, I was like, okay. I was also like really struggling personally. Like, I'm filming all these Red Rising recaps right now. So like, I'm kind of steeped in it. Obviously, Red Rising, like the lingo and a lot of the stuff, a lot of the world, a lot of the history, a lot of everything is like the society is very, very, very based on ancient Roman Greece. So like, please, everyone listening, please note that I recognize that. completely.
Yes.
And I know that Pierce Brown did not invent any of that. I am not saying that I think this is a ripoff by any means. I don't think that. I don't believe it. I don't no whiff of that.
Are we sure Pierce Brown didn't invent it?
100%.
I'm kidding.
I know.
There are 20 episodes about ancient Greek history on this podcast.
I know. Okay, I'm putting my leg up. It is so hot in this room.
Sorry, we're almost there.
No, I know. I feel like everyone, if anyone's watching the YouTube, my face is getting red. So
to the point, your point though, like there are, beyond the fact that
it's not just the language, it's not just the words. There's like so much, especially in the first part. I was like, we get it. You're so special.
I have such a fucking take. You know how sorry, I got excited. You know the allegations that Darrow is just like a dairy stew and he's just good at everything and blah blah blah, and I feel like my thoughts about Will of the Many, period, are that if you took the criticisms of the first Red Rising book, that it's just a book set at a school, that it's like, you know, YA and not YA, but like this isn't YA, but besides that one, that like the main character is just good at everything and we don't really see it. A lot of things are shown in
the women are only as perceived by men.
Yes, like a lot of that's what the Will of the Many is. And like I liked the characters, I liked the story. I didn't like where it went all the time, but I told you, I said, to me it's less than the sum of its parts. And you said you disagreed.
I did at first. The more I sat with it, the more I get where you're going with that. So like, let me finish my original thought, which I mean, I got myself off on a tangent. So part one, I felt was like, I was enjoying it. I was like, okay, a lot of similarities to Red Rising. Okay, this kid is so good at everything. Okay, he's a boy like no other. And
he's also a fucking prince.
Like a literal fucking prince. And I was like, okay. But I thought the world was cool. I liked what he did. Like, it took me so long. Like, I looked at the chart. I was like, that math doesn't math. And then when he explained it, like, and there were also times where I was like, that world dump was a little clunky. That, like, info dump was a little clunky. But then there were other times where I was like, that is a very well done way to, like, introduce this element of the world, of the system, of society, whatever it is. Like, there were so many times where it's like, sometimes it would be one way and sometimes it would be very other way. And I, like, it was a book that I found had a very hard time deciding how I was feeling about it throughout. Part two, however, I loved. Like, I was really enjoying it. I was like, okay, just kidding. This is cooking. We're going.
Part
like,
two
this is great.
is when he's at the school, or is that when he's training for it? Okay. So sorry to jump in again, but my thoughts were like, I liked the intro. And I was like, okay, and then once it became he's going to school, I was like, huh. And then he's really like, a lot of it is he's just at school. Like he has a mean teacher. He's struggling to make friends. Yeah. And all that. And I was just like, huh. Okay.
I always liked those though. Like,
I thought I did like it.
I love student friendship dynamic, like building relationships, like especially in a situation like that where they're in competition. Like, to me, that was very much the Institute of Red Rising. Like, I like that. Yeah. Like his friendship with the kid who like like. So
I didn't dislike how it was done. I didn't like that that's the direction it went, because like we started off, the whole world's at our fingertips. He's going to investigate this whole mystery, but then the way to do that is to go to school. It was kind of, that was where I was like, okay, interesting choice. Sorry, but
continue. So how dare you speak? No, I'm pulling up my review Storygraph because I timed out on Instagram. When I say like part two, like really, I just mean like the middle chunk. Like, I liked the school part up until the end. Because I think the end makes no sense. Not like the end. The end makes no fucking sense. It does this labyrinth. They've built up the entire fucking book. They build it up the entire book, and then it's nothing. And then we do learn at the very end that it's not nothing, that he's been split into 3 parts. So like, whatever. Okay, cool. But like, question mark. But like, the labyrinth part itself, I'm like, you barely have time to register that this other student's dead. Also, she was a fucking cunt, so who cares? But like,
Who dies? I'm rereading it now. I can't. Belly. Yeah.
Like
That's what I thought. Okay.
There were so many ways I was like, okay, no, it's like this character has to be the other student that they've like got like, and then Calidus dies. I was like, that was so unnecessary. And then like his girlfriend shoots him because she sees the bite, and she like doesn't want him to suffer.
Yeah.
So what's the bite look like? Like, why does she know that? Like, and I know that like it's okay to end a book with that many questions. I don't think it's okay to end a first book with that many questions.
Mm-hmm.
And that is second book bullshit. And second books are allowed to do that.
Also, it's a big twist, and like I love a shot twist. I love a shot ending. I would like it to be earned insofar that there's breadcrumbs, and like I think if there's a twist in a story that you can't, there's not breadcrumbs for it.
I thought
it's
the
bullshit.
brother might be alive.
That I thought that not that one, just like the split into different worlds and dimensions thing.
Oh yeah,
I was just like, okay, like that is crazy, but like, because it's not teased, I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Like, yeah, of course I'm surprised. There was nothing to indicate that.
Yeah, and like, there also isn't anything to indicate. Like, I didn't go back and read that chapter again where I was like, wait, what? To be like, how did he warp into like, because does he black out?
I don't remember. I'm like, he is back in school. He's about to go on vacation with the thirds. Is where I'm at. He's like tweaking because he has to go on vacation with his hot girlfriend, and well, they're not
at his old home
yet, but which is why he is.
That also, I was like,
that's
really?
Some bullshit.
Really, none of you like? Yes, Eero or not Eero. The other I named toy.
Indal. Yeah.
Okay.
Iden, Indal, Iroh, like they all have the same fucking names.
Bro, you should have done the thing with the alphabet where you cross out a letter when you name someone.
He does that a lot.
I just learned that trick from an author friend of mine.
That's smart.
So okay, here's what I wrote as my review. 4 stars because I enjoyed the experience. The story is decent, the characters are relatively lovable, and it's got some good quotes. But as a whole, it lacks the cohesion needed to make a really strong book.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I agree with your original take that I was like, oh, I don't know if that's it, but I had literally just finished.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, because when I saw that, I was like, girl, that's some bullshit. Because what you said is exactly
same words, different font.
Yeah, because I feel the same way. It's like if you think about it, you're like, I like this part, I like that part, I like all the characters are cool. Like they're all complex, and you can kind of. Like I liked everybody that you're supposed to like. I disliked who you're supposed to like. Like they're well written. I'm curious about Altiscore. Like he's fucking cool.
Who?
What's his deal? The guy who adopts him.
Say his name again.
Altiscore. That's how the narrator says it.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
The spelling and the how they're pronounced is some bullshit. I will say that from the book to book.
Yeah.
Some of them. But anyway, like, yeah, there's just something, I feel like, so there's a thing on, I saw a post that was basically talking about Letterboxd and was like, Letterboxd sucks because there's no way to differentiate between 5-star and it's, A Knight's Tale or 5 stars and it's some prestigious, incredible fucking movie. And it was like, yeah, well, that's what the 3-star and a heart is for.
What's
but I feel like
Letterboxd?
It's kind of Goodreads Story Draft, one of those for movies where you put your reviews and
okay,
all that bullshit. But anyway, so there's a book that I'll read and I'm like, this was fucking cool. It's just not that good. 4 stars. And I feel like this was good, but I didn't like it that much. 4 stars to me.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not bad. So I'm not going to give it 3 stars because.
Can we talk about
do you have the Gifted Children thing where
fight scene?
Yeah. That annoyed me because it's like, just let them fight.
Fuck.
Just let them fight.
Just
and also,
give them not steal. Like
that was kind of fine because you're like, okay, like he was raised a prince. He would be good at fighting. I can forgive that. It's a bit much. Like we're getting there. The chess was some bullshit where he beats Belly at chess, right? Or someone.
Yeah.
I was like, nah,
that actually I found more
believable
believable because he was 14 when his family died and like he had to run away. He was 14, which means old enough to be like learning how to sword fight.
No, that's what I'm saying. That was less bullshit.
No, I'm not done.
Okay, sorry.
you don't have to be physically anything. You don't have to be able to stand to learn how to play chess and to learn strategy. And he's had like strategy and stuff poured into him his whole life. Whereas like sword fighting, not as much, especially sword fighting like with the will-based thing.
Yeah.
And like then the what's it called? Like, yes, he's physically fit, but like none of his fights involved swords. They were like fist fights.
Yeah.
So I just felt like that was less believable because of it.
Okay.
Like, whereas like strategy games, if he played it all the time with his sister, which he says he did, he played it all the time with his sister. But yes, I felt like my note is literally a little Pacific Rim inspired action.
Yeah. But yes, that has been our. Do you have more thoughts? I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, that's okay. I don't really. I like.
Okay.
It's annoying because like I liked it. I gave it 4 stars.
It's just like frustrating.
But I think it's overhyped.
I agree.
I do also fully understand why so many Red Rising fans love it, because it gives a lot of the same stuff. But like, I do not think the prose is as good.
No,
not Red Rising #1, but like, I don't
the
think
rest.
The prose.
I'm not really
it's
like.
fucking big.
Yeah, it's a thick boy.
And I struggle to. I'm like, okay, we could have trimmed that down a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. Anywho, go on. You had something else to say.
That's been our kind of dive, our dipping our toes into literary corner. That's the backdoor pilot part of the podcast.
Yes, if you liked that little rant session and would like to hear more of it, please let us know.
Let us know. DMs are open.
Always. Absolutely, I will. So, folks, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Highkey Obsessed Podcast. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Sharkbait's Bookshelf. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your platform of choice and give us those 5-star ratings and reviews. If you don't give us 5 stars, we will force you to run a magical labyrinth thing full of zombie ghost men who will smoosh out your insides when they catch you.
Yeah, those things were vicious.
Yeah, that was creepy.
Yeah. And until next time, remember, pump up the jam. Pump it up while your feet are stomped.